Welcome back to Cheddar, everyone. We are going to turn our attention now to cannabis, one of these topics that we cover from time to time. When a state legalizes recreational marijuana, what happens to the inmates convicted of pot-related charges? It is an issue facing the state of California, which voted to legalize the drug last November. Joining us now with a closer look is Danny Danko, senior cultivation editor at High Times. Danny, thanks for joining us.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So what happens? People are wondering, right? If you've been in prison because of drug use in the past, because of marijuana-related charges, what happens to you then if the state legalizes cannabis?
Well, what happens, hopefully, is that your conviction is overturned because it makes it much more difficult to get work, to get a loan. I think people that are facing deportation, if they have pending cases or past cases, they're much more likely to be deported. So I think it's very important for people to have these convictions removed.
Is there any precedent for having having convictions removed retroactively, having people let out of jail who are under a conviction on a law that gets overturned?
Yes, I mean, I believe that after the end of alcohol prohibition, a lot of those people who were doing time or people who had convictions for alcohol-related crimes actually were pardoned or had their convictions overturned.
All right, so for California specifically here, right, legalizing marijuana, so for California as a use case, what is expected now to happen in that state?
Well, I think there's enormous economic benefits. I think recently a report came out that we have almost 250,000 jobs nationwide that have been created in the legal cannabis industry. There's been a real estate boom in places like Colorado, Oregon, and Washington, and California for places to not only to sell cannabis, but also to produce it.
Okay, but for those convicted, right, in the state of California, are they going to be completely expunged? What happens to them?
Well, hopefully they are going to be expunged. There is a program right now where MPP, Marijuana Policy Project, is helping people who have been convicted to overturn their convictions and have them removed from the record. So I think it is really important for people, particularly because these convictions actually, really hold them back from a lot of things. Like I said, work, potential loans that they might get, even voting for their representatives as well. I mean, if you have a felony conviction, you're not allowed to vote. So I think it's very important for people to have these convictions overturned.
All right, and Canada, right, has been leading the way here, more so than the U.S. Canada also now considering legislation to create the legal age for marijuana use at 18, right? Legalizing marijuana nationwide at that particular age. Is there a way, do you think that the U.S., some of these states, to what extent do they look at Canada sort of as setting the precedent here when it comes to marijuana legislation? I mean, what happens in Canada? Is there any spillover effect to what we might see happen here?
Absolutely, I think so. Because that age of 18, I mean, if we can trust people to join the military, if we can allow them to smoke cigarettes, which are far, far more harmful than cannabis, I think we can allow them to consume cannabis. And the people who consume cannabis at the highest rate are between 18 and 24 years old. So I think we don't want to keep our heads in the sand and ignore the fact that people, are consuming cannabis at that age. And at the same time, we want them to be a part of society, and we want their any money that they might spend to go towards taxes and infrastructure and jobs and all of that.
Dan Premack at Axios has got a great story up this morning. A company called Hound Labs in Oakland raising $8 million for a marijuana breathalyzer. Have you ever, Danny, ever hear of marijuana breathalyzers, that concept? It seems like it'd be useful for driving and for people to self-check, regulate, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very difficult to test people for impairment based on a marijuana-type breathalyzer. Marijuana has a tendency to stay in your system much longer than other illicit substances, and so you could have smoked last night and still test positive on a marijuana breathalyzer and in no way be impaired. So I think it's a flawed sort of system, and I think it's much more important, I think, for law enforcement to judge impairment over just consumption, and because I think that impairment is what we're worried about. People driving without the skills and without the ability to react quickly to instances, and I think if you smoked a day before or 2 days before, you're not impaired, but you may test positive on one of those breathalyzers.
All right,
so I think
thanks.
it's a flawed system.
Danny Danko, Senior Cultivation Editor at High Times. Appreciate, as always, you joining us. Coming up, will Twitter eventually make users pay for the platform? Unlikely, but Jack Dorsey made some questions at the shareholder meeting yesterday, answered some questions suggesting he was open to the idea.